Hey guys, Chubbs here, back again with another Doom tutorial, and today I'm going to be showing you how to use moving cameras and make basic cutscenes. So before we get started, I'm just going to show you this little map here that I've made. So we have this sort of tech base-like structure that the player starts inside of. And so if we go down the staircase here, you can see we have some windows, and then at the bottom of this structure we have an opening. And then directly across from it we have this sort of wooden structure, and you can see a door here. And behind the door, if I can sort of raise it up, you can see that a Cacodemon is waiting, and then behind the Cacodemon we have a red key card. But my goal here in this tutorial is to essentially create a cutscene in which when the player sort of crosses here where the top of the staircase is, a cutscene begins in which a moving camera starts here, and then it sort of flies down through this window, and then it flies around and ends up in front of this door. And then this door is going to open up, the Cacodemon is sort of going to hiss, and then fly over here towards the structure that we started in, almost like it's coming after us. So now that I've explained what we're going to do, let's get started with the moving camera. When you work with moving cameras, there are two strange things about them. The first strange thing is that the placement of the moving camera thing actually doesn't really matter much, because the moving camera is going to be following these interpolation points that you set up. So let's go ahead and let's place the moving camera thing right now. That's the most logical starting point, and like I said, the exact placement of it is not important. So I'm just going to place it somewhere here near the top of the staircase. So in thing mode, I'll go ahead and place a thing, and just by luck I already had it there. But if you end up like in the list of things, to find the moving camera, all you have to do is look for the cameras and interpolation category, expand that, and then go to moving camera, and then click OK. So like I said, the placement of the moving camera thing is not really important, because what we're worried about is the placement of the interpolation points, which is the path that the camera is going to travel along. And now is when we're going to get started with those interpolation points, and this is where we're going to get into the second weird thing about moving cameras. So by default, a moving camera's path is curved. So instead of being like a straight linear path from one interpolation point to the next, the path ends up being curved, and as a result of that, the very first interpolation point that you place and the very last interpolation point don't really matter much, because they just play a role in helping shape the overall curve. And we're going to see that as we go along. So let's get to placing those points down. So like I just said, the placement of the very first and the very last don't really matter much. So for the very first, I'm just going to place it somewhere here near the moving camera. So I'll place a thing, and then inside that same cameras and interpolation category, I'm going to go to interpolation point. And before I click OK, what we're going to do is we're going to be giving each interpolation point a unique ID. So I'm going to go up to the Action tab, and under Identification, I'm going to give it a tag or an ID that's unused. So I'm just going to click the Unused button, and so this one now has a tag of 1. And now is when we're going to start getting serious about the placement, because like I said, the very first interpolation point is just going to play a part in the curved path. From now on is when we're placing points that will determine where the camera actually starts and goes. So since I said I want it to start here about right here at the top of this staircase, that's where I'm going to place my next interpolation point. So I'm going to try and stick it there, and I'll probably have to change my grid size to get it right where I want it. We'll start it about right here, and then I'm going to adjust the height of it to be about where I think the player's viewpoint will be. I think this will be okay right here. And I also forgot to give it an ID, so I'm going to give it an unused tag. So you can see it now has a tag of 2. And then we're ready to place our next interpolation point. So like I was saying in my early demonstration, I want it to start here, and I want it to sort of fly down through this window. So the next interpolation point will be somewhere near or inside this window. So I'll go ahead and place one here, And I'll mess with my grid size again to get it just where I want it. I guess I'll just stick it about right here. Mess with the height of it. I'll put it about right there as far as the height is concerned. And then I'm going to stick one last point here that will be along the path somewhere in front of where the door's at. So I'll just stick it about right here. Raise the height up to where I want the camera to sort of end at. I think this will be okay. And as far as the like the path that we're going to see, we are finished. And I also, you know what? I just now realized that I broke my rule. I forgot to give these points a tag as I was placing them. So let's go to the one in the window and let's give it an unused tag. So it has a tag of 3. And then let's go to the one in front of the door, give it an unused tag. So now they all have tags. So I forgot my own rule, but we have fixed it now. And we have one last piece of work to do. So like I was saying, the very first interpolation point doesn't really matter because it's just there to shape the curve, and the very last one doesn't matter because it's going to shape the curve. So we do want this point here to be part of the camera's path, but we still need one last point to help shape the curve. So I'm just going to stick the last one somewhere near this one. So I'll just stick it off here to the side somewhere, and then I'm also going to give it an ID. And we are just about finished setting these up. So now what we need to do, since they each have unique IDs, is we need to link these points together. So this is going to be really simple. We're just basically going to be daisy chaining these things. So I'm going to go to the very first interpolation point, pull up its properties, and I'm going to say that the next point tag, since this one has a tag of 1, the next point will have a tag of 2. And click OK. And you can see a line is now pointing from this one to the next one. And then we'll just go to the next one. And since it has a tag of 2, we'll say that the next point is 3. And we'll just continue this process. So go to the one in the window. It's 3, so we'll say the next tag is 4. Go to the one here. Since it has a tag of 4, we'll say that the next one is 5. And we're finished. We don't need to go to this last one and give it a next point because it is the very last one, and there is going to be no next point. So there's no need to do that part. There's no need to do that step. But you can see that we now have lines that go from one interpolation point to the next, and that just allows us to easily see what the chain of points is. But you can also see that right now we're just looking at a linear line from one to the next. We're not seeing the curved line that is actually going to be used by the camera. And the reason for that is because we've not yet set up the camera to be associated with this path. And doing that is really simple. So let's just go to that moving camera that we placed at the beginning, pull up its properties, and then under interpolation point tag, we need to tell it the tag of the first point, which is just going to be 1. So I'm going to type 1, click OK, and now you can immediately see that instead of being like these straight lines, we have some visible curves. Something else to observe here is if we go to the very first point and the very last point, you might notice something a little weird here. The last point, as well as the very first one, instead of them having like a blue line that forms a curve, they just have a straight orange line. So here at the first one, notice this straight orange line, and then on the last one, notice how it has a straight orange line. So this basically tells you that these are not going to be part of the camera's path, and that these are just there to help with the curve. And something else that's kind of odd about this is as you drag these around, they will shape the curve. So let me just use the very first one as an example. So as I drag it around, keep an eye on this curve right here at the start. So I'm going to drag it off. Notice how that curve is being changed. It almost reminds me of the handles whenever you use the pen tool in Photoshop. So notice how the position of this very first interpolation point directly affects the shape of the curve. So, whoops, I accidentally placed another object that I didn't mean to, but that is a sort of strange behavior. But you can basically you can position this to shape the curve the way you want it. So I think I'm kind of happy with it like this. And then if we go to the very last point, it's the same way. So as I move this very last one around, pay attention to the shape of this curve here. So notice how much of a difference we can make in how that's shaped. I'm going to, I keep accidentally placing new things. I'm going to position it about right here, but you'll probably need to fine-tune these as you go along. But now that I've explained how all this works, we need to, the next step that we need to do is we need to determine how long it's going to take for the camera to travel from one point to the next. Because right now, if we were to try and start this moving camera, it doesn't know how long it's supposed to take along the path, so it's just going to fly along it at like super speed. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to go to the very first one because it's not part of the path, but I am going to go to the one after it, and I'm going to pull up its properties, and you can see that we have a travel time, and this is in octics, and that is basically 1/8 of a second. And if we pull this, if we access this like drop-down menu here, you can see that it gives you a guide that you can follow. So 8 of these octics is 1 second, 34 is 4 seconds. So you can use this as a guideline. For now, I'm just going to say 1 second for the travel time. And what that does is it means that to travel from here to this next point, it's going to take 1 second. So now I'm going to go to the one that's in the window, and I'm going to do the same for it. I'm going to give it a travel time of 1 second, and so that means to go from the one in the window to the next one, it's going to be about 1 second. And that might be a little bit too fast. We're probably going to have to tweak it a little bit, but we'll test it out and sort of see what it's like. So we're just about finished setting up the camera. One last important step is we need to tell the camera how to behave as far as where it's looking as it travels along the path. By default, it's not going to look along the path, but thankfully we can automate that, and you can also sort of fine-tune it and have manual control over it, and I'll show you how you can do that here in a little bit. But to automate the direction of the camera, all you have to do is pull up the moving camera's properties. So we'll pull up the moving camera thing, and on its action tab, click this little box here under options, and you can see some options here. You can see how if you want to, instead of a curved path, you could turn it into a linear path. We're not going to do that. We're also not going to mess with this last option here that's show to everyone, but we are going to check the 3 that are like in the middle here. Use point angle, use point pitch, and face movement direction. With all 3 of these checked like this, what this is going to tell the camera is to face the direction of the path. So basically like the direction of the curve. The camera is almost going to fly along this path just like I'm doing here in visual mode. And that way, on your end, you don't have to do really any work. Now if you wanted to, you could go to the camera's properties and you could uncheck face movement direction. If you were to do that, I'm gonna go back to what we had. But if you uncheck face movement direction, that means that the direction that the camera is facing, as well as the pitch, is dependent on each interpolation point. So if you wanted the camera to face straight ahead, you would have to make this interpolation point face that way. If you wanted the camera to be pitched a certain way, then you would have to specifically go to this interpolation point and set its pitch, and you would have to do that for all the interpolation points. So that gives you finer control, but it also requires more work. So right now we have the camera set up in that sort of automated mode where it will just automatically face the path. So all that talking aside, our camera is basically set up and ready to go, but we need to activate it, and we're going to do that by using a script. So I'm going to write a basic script, and then we're going to tie it to a walkover line that's right here at the top of the staircase. So I'm going to pull up the script editor, and if you are brand new to scripting, I have a ZDoom ACS scripting series, but I'll go ahead and just start here. So we're going to begin with the line at the top that you will always need, and that is the number sign or the pound sign include, and then in quotations, zcommon.acs. And then we're going to go down and we're just going to write a basic script. I'm just going to call it, we'll just call it activate moving camera. And this will be a void script. And we're going to do essentially three things. We want to stop the player dead in his tracks. We want to freeze him, and then we want to activate the camera. And we're also going to be switching to the camera, so that's actually four things that we're going to be doing. But let's tackle those one at a time, and I'm going to sort of comment this as I'm going along. So I'm going to make a comment here, stop and freeze player. That's what we're going to do here first. So to stop the player dead in his tracks, you can use a built-in function called thing_stop. That'll just bring his momentum to a halt. Next, to freeze the player, I believe the function is called setPlayerProperty. And for this, we're just going to type 1 to affect everyone. Set, I believe if you type 1, this sets it to true. If you type 0, that turns it off. I'm going to say 1 because we want to turn this property on. And then this is which property you want to set. And this is going to be prop_totally frozen. So that totally freezes the player so that he can't move or even look around. And then I'm going to put a semicolon. And let me compile this to make sure I didn't mess anything up here. I actually messed up here. Thing stop. I thought I missed something there. So this is not supposed to be just open parentheses. You're supposed to actually have a 0 in here. What the 0 will do is it will just stop the activator of the script. So I'll try again. There we go. So I thought I messed that up. But these two lines will stop the player, and then they will freeze him. That way his momentum will stop, and then he will not be able to move. Next, we want to change to the camera and activate it. So to change to the camera, there's a built-in function that's conveniently called change camera. So the ID, this is the ID of the camera that you want to change to. And you know what? I think we actually forgot to set that up here in the editor. That was my mistake. So go to the moving camera thing, right click it, and give it a tag that hasn't been used yet. I'm just going to click unused. So this will be a tag of 6. I can't believe I forgot to do that, but you can't catch everything, I guess. So going back to our function here, we're going to type 6 because that's the camera we want to change to. This is basically who it affects. I think if you type 1, then it affects everybody. So that's what I'm going to do, comma. And then revert. For this, if you type 1, that means that if the player moves, that it switches the camera back to his view. If you type 0, that means that even if he moves around, it's going to stay on this camera. Just to be safe, I'm going to type 0 because I don't want this to ever switch away unless we explicitly tell it to. And now, this isn't enough. Right now what we're doing is we're stopping the player and freezing him, and we're switching cameras. But with a moving camera, what you have to do to get it moving along that path is you have to explicitly activate it. And to do that, you just use the thing_activate function, and you type the ID of what you want to activate, which is 6. And you know what? Let me, I just want to make sure I did give that an ID of 6, right? Yep. Just want to make sure that the moving camera has an ID of 6. That way we don't mess it up. So I'll compile again, so we did not get any errors. So let me run back over this script here real quick. So whenever we activate this script, first thing that's going to happen, the player is going to be stopped dead in his tracks. He's going to be frozen so that he can't move. We're going to switch to our moving camera, and then we're going to activate it, and that way it'll start to move along its path. So right now, all that should happen is when we cross this line here, we haven't given the line an action yet, but we're going to do that. But whenever we cross the line, we should stop, and then we'll follow this path, and then sort of end here near this door, and then nothing else will happen. So one last thing, let's go ahead and give that line action here to the top step, or to this line here. So I'm going to go to the line's properties, give it an action of 80 script execute. I'm going to say that it's a named script, and the script is going to be activate moving camera, and then it's going to be when the player walks over. This is not going to be repeatable. So I'll click OK, and let's go ahead. Let's run a quick test, and let's see if it works. Alright, so you could see that was pretty quick. I wasn't real happy with the time there, but when we crossed that line, the camera did indeed start here and sort of follow along its path, and it sort of ended up here in front of the door. But the camera went pretty quick. I wasn't happy with that, so I'm going to modify the time here. So I'm going to go to the first point. I'm going to increase its travel time. Instead of 8 octicks, which is 1 second, I'm going to try giving it 16. And then for this window, since the window has a little bit of a longer path, I'm going to go to that one's interpolation point, and instead of 16, I'm going to try, let's try 24 octicks. And now let's just run another test, and let's see how it goes. Okay, so I think that was a little bit better. One thing I noticed at the very last camera is that it was a little low. I think I'm going to raise it a little bit. And some other odd behavior that I also noticed is that when our moving camera first started, we got a brief glimpse of the player. And I'm not 100% sure why that happens. I noticed that before when I was testing earlier. It may have to do with the facing direction of these, even though the camera should be facing our path. So what I'm going to do, just to be safe, I'm going to grab really all 3 of these objects here, and I'm going to try making them all face forwards, like towards the window. And maybe then we won't see that brief glimpse of the player when the camera very first operates. So we'll go ahead and we'll run a quick test though. What we're going to be looking for is whether it shows that brief glimpse of the player, and also whether the camera looks better here when it's at the door. So let's do a quick test and be right back again. Okay, so that was better. I think that when I changed their facing direction, that did actually help. So one behavior perhaps that this has is that if you have this very first interpolation point along the path facing like towards the player, it's possible that for a split second you'll see him before the camera actually faces along the path. So that's something you might want to be aware of, and you might want to tweak just so you don't see anything that you don't want to before the camera snaps into its movement. I also still think the camera at the end was maybe a little too low, so I'm going to still raise it up just a little bit. But I think I'm happy for the most part with what we have with this camera. But now what we need to do, or what I want to do, is have it so that when we reach this last point here, we open the door and show the Cacodemon, and then I want the Cacodemon to sort of be alerted and travel into this room. So let's try and take this one step at a time. So one really cool thing about interpolation points and moving cameras is that there is a special thing. I think it's called interpolation special or something like that. So let's go to the thing list. I'm going to add a thing. I'm going to pull up our thing list, and here it is, interpolation special. So what this does is it executes any special that you would like whenever you reach a certain interpolation point. So we can tie this special to our very last point here on our camera path, so that when the camera reaches that point, the special that we want to activate happens. So in this case, what I want us to do is I want to have that special execute a script that opens the door and triggers the Cacodemon. So let's the placement of the interpolation special doesn't matter, but just to make it more clear what it's associated with, I'm going to stick it here near this point, and I'm going to pull up its properties, go to its tab, and basically the way that it works is whenever you give this interpolation special a tag, whichever tag you give it is the interpolation point that it's associated with. So this point right here has a tag of 4, and so that's the tag that we need to give our special. So let's give it a tag of 4, and you can now see that in the editor we have a line between these. So this is telling us that when the camera reaches this point, this special is going to activate. But right now we don't have any special to use, so we need to write a script. So let's go ahead. I'm going to pull up the script editor again, and I'm going to write a brand new script. So we're going to call this script, I'm trying to think of a name for this. Let's just call this last interpolation point, because we want this script to happen when we reach it. That might not be a good name for it, because that's not real descriptive as to what this script does, but I think I'll just leave it like that for now. So I'm going to start simple. I'm not going to try and do this all in one go. Let's start simple by opening the door. So you can see that I've gone ahead of time, and the door that the Cacodemon is behind has a tag of 1. So let's try to do that here. So inside this script, we're going to say door underscore open. And that's a built-in function. We're going to say that the tag of the door is 1. For the speed, we'll just set it to 32. And light tag we can safely ignore, so I'm going to put that at 0, and we'll end it with a semicolon. And then I'll compile. And now let's try to tie this script to that interpolation special. So I'm going to pull up the special's properties. I'm going to tell it that the action is 80 script execute. Make sure it's a named script, and then I'm going to point it to the last interpolation point script. So now let's try this out, and if it works, when we reach this last point, that should trigger this special, which in turn should execute the last interpolation point script that we just wrote, and that should open this door. So let's try it, and let's just make sure it works. Okay, cool. So that worked. I do think I want to move this last point here just a little closer to the door. So I'm still just tweaking this. When you make these cameras, you'll have to tweak them a lot to get the look that you want. But I moved it a little bit closer. But you could see though that when we reached this point, the door did indeed open. So now that we've taken care of the door, we need to take care of the Cacodemon. So if I pull up the Cacodemon properties, you can see that I've gone ahead and given it a tag of 666. And what I want to do is I want to tell the Cacodemon to wake up and go inside here, which is the very bottom of this text-based structure that the player starts in. So to tell like an enemy or an actor to go somewhere, you can use it may be, let's see, an interpolation point. I think it's actually different for them. Let's see. Patrol point. That's what I was looking for. So I get those mixed up. So for a monster or an actor, it's actually a patrol point that you want. So that was my mistake. So I'm going to place a patrol point right down in here. This is where I'm going to tell the Cacodemon to go. And I'm going to give that patrol point an ID. So I'm going to give it an unused ID, which will be 7. And now that we have the Cacodemon with an ID of 666 and our patrol point with an ID of 7, we should be able to go ahead and take care of this. So I'm going to pull up my script here, and I'm going to go below our door open. And the first thing that I want us to do is I don't want the Cacodemon to be alerted immediately. I want it to wait for the door to be fully open. And to do that, if you wanted to, you could do a delay, and then you could try to wait just the right amount of time. But another way that you can do it that is really cool is you can use this built-in function called tag wait. And what this does is this allows you to insert the tag of like a door or even a lift or something else like that. And this waits until that door or lift or whatever it is has totally finished doing its action before the code that follows executes. So if I do tag wait and then I type 1, which is the tag of the door, then this is going to say hold on until the door is fully open before any of this code below executes. So that's really nice and convenient. So when this script runs, the door is going to open. This is going to tell the rest of the script to hold on until the door is fully open. And so now we can safely write our code for the Cacodemon. And that way the Cacodemon is not going to do anything until the door is fully open. So the first thing that I want to do with the Cacodemon is, let's see, I think the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make the Cacodemon sort of hiss. And to do that, there's a special function that's built in. I'm going to go over to the ZDoom Wiki to show you guys. It's called Play Actor Sound. And this allows you to use some built-in sounds for specific actors. And the sound that I'm interested in is sound_C. This is like that hiss sound that the Cacodemon would make if it saw you. And this would be like the sound for any enemy if it saw you. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to try and use this function here. And I'm going to go back to this page and reference it as we type the function out. So let's go underneath our tag wait, which will wait on the door. I'm going to say play actor sound, and you can see it's asking us for some info. So ID is the ID of the actor. Our Cacodemon has an ID of 666. That's what I'll type. The sound is let's see, it was something C sound. Sound_C. I'll just copy it and then we'll paste it in. Channel, we'll go back to the wiki and reference that. The wiki is an invaluable resource, as you can see. So it says the channel to play the sound on. The default is chan_body, so we'll use that. I'll just copy that. We'll paste it in. Volume. For this, 0.0 is the lowest and 1.0 is full volume, so I use 1.0. Looping, we don't want this sound to loop, so I'm going to type false. And then attenuation, I'm going to consult the wiki on that. So how quickly the sound fades, none. I think we're going to use no attenuation. I want this sound to be heard no matter how far away we are. So I'm going to copy this, attenuation none, and then I'm just going to paste it in. Right like that. So there we go. So to recap what we have thus far, when this script runs, the door opens. This tells anything below to wait until that door is fully open. And then once the door has fully opened, we're going to have the Cacodemon play that hiss sound like it's just seen us. Next, I want to go ahead and tell the Cacodemon to fly over here into this building. So I want it to fly to this patrol point. To do that, there's a handy function that's built in called thing_set_goal. And this basically tells a thing to go to a patrol point. So the first thing that it asks us for is the ID of what we want to move. So that'll be 666 for the Cacodemon. And then the ID of the goal, which I think was 7. Yep, 7, which will be the ID of that patrol point. Delay, we don't want there to be any delay for this, so I'm just going to type 0. And then don't chase target. The way this works is if you type 1, that means that even if it sees you, it's still going to try and fly to that goal. If it's 0, if it sees you, it's basically just going to abandon that goal and just chase you. I want it to try and fly into that room no matter what, so I'm going to type 1. So even if it sees us, it's not going to come after us. It's just going to keep flying until it reaches that room. And end it with the semicolon. So we should have it just about finished now. We do still have a little bit of work left, but we're going to test this and see how it works so far. So to recap what we've done, whenever we get to this last interpolation point, this special is going to execute, and that will call this script that we wrote. When this script runs, the door that the Cacodemon is hiding behind is going to open. This is going to say, wait until the door is fully open. And then once it has fully opened, we're going to make the Cacodemon hiss with this function. And then this function is going to make it fly out of the room that it's in towards this patrol point that I set. And since we're going to be looking through the camera, from our view, we should sort of see the Cacodemon fly out past the camera. So let's go ahead, let's just test this out, and let's make sure this all works. Okay, cool. So that worked out just like I was hoping, and I think I was actually pretty happy with the placement of that camera position too. I think I'm pretty good with that now. So you could see that when we hit that last interpolation point, that triggered the special. the door opened, and then once it had fully opened, the Cacodemon hissed, and it flew out over here towards the patrol point. So now we basically have one last thing to do. You could see that when the Cacodemon flew out, we were still stuck looking through that camera. We were basically still frozen in place. So what I want us to do is, at some point, like after the Cacodemon has flown past the camera, I want the screen to basically fade to black, and then I want to switch the camera back to us and unfreeze us, and then we're going to fade the screen back in. So let's go to the script window here, and I'm going to comment this so we can follow it a little bit easier for what we want to do. So I'm going to sort of repeat what I just said. So we want to fade to black, switch the camera and unfreeze player, and then fade in. So we'll do this one at a time. So to fade the entire screen to black, there's a function that you can use, and it's simply called fade to. This allows you to fade the screen to any color that you want. You can see that you can put in a red, green, and blue value. If you enter 0 for red, green, and blue, that's basically black. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do 0, 0, 0 for the RGB. Next, it's asking us for the amount. This goes from 0.0 to 1.0. So if we do 1.0, that is full black. So that's what we want. And then you get to enter how long it takes for this fade to happen. This is just in seconds. So if I type 1.0, then over the course of 1 second, the screen is going to fade totally to black. And I think that's what I'm going to do. Next, I want to perform a delay so that the code that comes after our fade doesn't execute until the fade is totally finished. So I'm going to put a delay right under it. And since our delay, or since our fade is taking 1 second, I'm also going to make our delay take 1 second. So I'm just going to type 35 for the delay. We may have to tweak this, but basically this is going to be 1 second to match our fade. So once the fade has fully happened, we're going to switch the camera back to the player. So to do that, I'm going to do change camera. And then for the ID, instead of typing the ID of some sort of camera, I'm just going to type 0. And that should take it back to the player. For who, 1 will affect all the players, so I'll type 1. And then, like I was saying earlier, if you type 1 for revert, that means if the player moves or anything, it'll switch the camera back. In this case, this is not really relevant, but I'm just going to type 1 because we do want to give control back, and we'll just do that to be safe, but it's not really necessary. So this should switch the camera back to the player. He's also still going to be frozen, so we want to undo that. So we're going to do the set player property again. Who, if we type 1, that's for all the players, so we'll just go ahead and do that. Now this is where it's going to be different. For set, if you type 1, that sets the property on, and if you type 0, that turns the property off. So I'm going to type 0 because we want to turn it off, and then the property that we want to turn off is prop underscore totally frozen. So this is basically saying take totally frozen and turn it off so that the player's not frozen anymore. And then you can see we need to fade back in, because if we don't do that, then even though we've given the camera back to the player and unfrozen him, his screen's going to be black, so he's not going to be able to see anything. That's not going to be good. So let's go ahead and do, we'll do fade to, we'll do 0, 0, 0, and then instead of doing full black, we're going to do 0.0, which is no black, so basically no color at all, and then we're going to say that that will occur over the course of 1 second. And then I'll put a semicolon. We'll try and compile. And I noticed something up here that we're going to have to change, but for now what's going to happen is with this code that we've added, the screen's going to fade to black. We're going to wait until that fade's totally finished. Then we're going to switch the camera back to the player and unfreeze him. And finally, with this code here, we're going to turn the black fade totally off, and that's going to happen over the course of 1 second. So within 1 second, the screen is going to fade back in so that there's no black on the screen. So the part that I noticed that we missed is that if we have it right here, what's going to happen is, let me explain the flow of the logic. So the door is going to open. it's going to wait till the door's open, and then the Cacodemon is going to hiss and it's going to fly. But the problem is our fade to black is going to happen immediately after this code, and so we need to wait. I want to put a delay in here. That way it's going to wait, like when the Cacodemon flies out, we want it to wait just a couple seconds. I'm sort of going to give the Cacodemon like enough time to fly off camera, and then we'll do the fade to black and the process of switching the camera back. So let's do a delay, and then we'll do 35 times, and we'll say 3. So that's basically 3 seconds. 35 ticks is 1 second, so this will be a 3-second delay. And let me comment this to make it more clear what's happening. So awaken Cacodemon and send a long path. Wait a few seconds. Fade to black. So now that should make it more clear. So the door's going to open. We're going to hold off till the door's fully open. We're going to tell the Cacodemon to wake up and fly, and then we're going to wait just a few seconds, and this will give that last camera time to watch the Cacodemon fly by, and then we're going to do the fade to black. We're going to give the camera back to the player and fade back in. So everything should be set up. Hopefully this will work. So we'll go ahead and we're going to save. We're going to test our map, and we're going to see what we've got. Alright, so everything worked perfectly. We saw the door open, the Cacodemon flew out, and just like we specified in our script, when the Cacodemon started to fly, we waited 3 seconds. That just sort of gave him enough time to fly off screen. Then after he'd flown off screen, and after this delay had waited, we faded to black, we switched our camera back to the player and unfroze him, and then we were back in control. So that is how you can use moving cameras to set up cutscenes. That's just a really basic example. Of course, you can do far more with them. You have many more options, many more things you can do, but I hope this will help serve as a starting point. And if you guys have any questions about any of this stuff, feel free and leave a comment below. And as always, I really appreciate you guys watching. This is Chubb signing out.